Many books discuss why emotions and how they affect your life. They really provide a comprehensive view. Part 1. What emotions are. Have you ever wondered what emotions are and what purpose they serve? In this section, we'll discuss how your survival mechanisms impact your emotions. Then we'll explain what the ego is and how it impacts your emotions. Finally, we'll discover the mechanism behind emotions and learn why it's so hard to deal with the negative ones. How your survival mechanisms affect your emotions. Why people have a bias towards negativity. Your brain is designed for survival, which means why you're able to read this book at this very moment. When you think about it, the probability of you being born was extremely low. For this miracle to happen, all of the generations before you had to survive long enough to procreate. In their quest for survival and procreation, they must have faced death hundreds or perhaps thousands of times. Fortunately, unlike your ancestors, you're probably not facing death every day. In fact, in many parts of the world, life has never been safer. Yet your survival mechanism hasn't changed much. Your brain still scans your environment, looking for potential threats. In many ways, some parts of your brain have become obsolete. While you may not be seconds away from being eaten by a predator, your brain still gives significantly more weight to adverse events than to positive ones. Fear of rejection is one example of a bias toward negativity. In the past, being rejected by your tribe would reduce your chances of survival significantly. Therefore, you learn to look for any sign of rejection, and this became handwritten in your brain. Nowadays, being rejected often carries little or no consequences to your long-term survival. You can be hated by the entire world and still have a job, a roof, and plenty of food on the table, yet your brain remains programmed to perceive rejection as a threat to your survival. This hardwiring is why rejection can be so painful. While you know most rejections are no big deal, you nevertheless feel the emotional pain. If you listen to your mind, you may even create a whole drama about it. You may believe you aren't worthy of love and dwell on a rejection for days or weeks. Worse still, you may become depressed as a result of this rejection. One single criticism can often outweigh hundreds of positive ones. That's why an author with 50 5-star reviews is likely to feel terrible when they receive a single 1-star review. While the author understands the 1-star review isn't a threat to her survival, her authorial brain doesn't. It likely interprets the negative view as a threat to her ego, which triggers an emotional reaction. The fear of rejection can also lead you to over-dramatize events. If your boss criticizes you at work, your brain might see the criticism as a threat, and now you think, what if my boss fires me? What if I can't find a job quickly enough and my wife leaves me? What about my kids? What if I can't see them again? While you are fortunate to have such a useful survival mechanism, it is also your responsibility to separate real threats from imaginary ones. If you don't, you'll experience unnecessary pain and worry that will negatively impact your quality of life. To overcome this bias towards negativity, you must reprogram your mind. One of a human being's greatest powers is our ability to use our thoughts to shape our reality and interpret events in a more empowering way. This book will teach you how to do this. Action step. Complete the corresponding exercise in the workbook. Why your brain's job isn't to make you happy. Your brain's primary responsibility is not to make you happy, but to ensure your survival. Thus, if you want to be happy, you must actively take control of your emotions rather than hoping you'll be happy, because it's your natural state. In this following section, we'll discuss what happiness is and how it works. How dopamine can mess with your happiness. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that, along with other functions, plays a significant role in rewarding certain behaviors. When dopamine releases into specific areas of your brain, the pleasure centers, you get an intense sense of well-being similar to a high. This sense of well-being is what happens during exercise, when you gamble, or even eat great food. One of the roles of dopamine is to ensure you look for food so you don't die of starvation, and your search for a mate so you can reproduce. Without dopamine, our species would likely be extinct by now. It's a pretty good thing, right? Well, yes and no. In today's world, this reward system is in many cases obsolete. In the past, dopamine directly linked to our survival. Now, it can be stimulated artificially. A great example of this effect is social media, which uses psychology to suck as much time as possible out of your life. Have you noticed all of the notifications that pop up regularly? They're used to trigger a release of dopamine, so you stay connected. And the longer you stay connected, the more money these services make. Gambling can also lead to a release of dopamine, which can make these activities highly addictive. Fortunately, we don't need to act each time our brain releases dopamine. For instance, we don't need to continuously check Facebook news feeds just because it gives us a pleasurable shot of dopamine. Today's society is selling a version of happiness that can make us unhappy. We've become addicted to dopamine mainly because our marketers, who have found effective ways to exploit our brains. We receive multiple shots of dopamine throughout the day and we love it. But is this the same thing as happiness? Worse than that, dopamine can create real addictions with severe consequences on our health. Research conducted at Tulane University showed that when permitted to self-stimulate their pleasure center, participants did an average of 40 times per minute. They chose the simulation of their pleasure center over food, even refusing to eat when hungry. Korean Lee Swang-seop is an extreme case of this syndrome. In 2005, Mr. Seop died after playing a video game for 58 hours straight with very little food or water and no sleep. The subsequent investigation concluded that the cause of death was heart failure induced by exhaustion and dehydration. He was only 28 years old. To take control of your emotions, you must understand the role dopamine plays and how it affects your happiness. Are you addicted to your phone? Are you glued to your TV? Or maybe you spend too much time playing video games. Most of us are addicted to something. For some people, it's obvious, but for others, it's more subtle. For instance, you could be addicted to thinking. To better control your emotions, you must recognize and shed the light on your addiction, as they can rob you of your happiness. The one day I will myth. Do you believe that one day you will achieve your dream and finally be happy? It is unlikely to happen. You may, and I hope you will, achieve your goal, but you won't live happily ever after. This thinking is just another trick your mind plays on you. Your mind quickly acclimates to new situations, which is probably the result of evolution and our need to adapt continually to survive and reproduce. This acclimatization is also probably why the new car or house you want will only make you happy for a while. Once the initial excitement wears off, you'll move on to a new crave, the next exciting thing. This phenomenon is known as hedonic adaptation. How hedonic adaptation works. Let me share an interesting study that will likely change the way you see happiness. This study, which was conducted in 1978 on lottery winners and paraplegics, was incredibly eye-opening for me. The investigation evaluated how winning the lottery or becoming a paraplegic influence happiness? The study found that 1 year after the event, both groups were just as happy as they were beforehand. Yes, just as happy or unhappy. You can find more about it by watching Dan Gilbert's TED Talk, The Surprising Science of Happiness. Perhaps you believe that you'll be happy once you've made it, but as the above study on happiness shows, this is simply not true. No matter what happens to you, your mind works by reverting to your predetermined level of happiness once you've adapted to the new event. Does that mean you can't be happier than you are right now? No. What it means is that in the long run, external events have minimal impact on your level of happiness. In fact, according to Sonia, author of The How of Happiness, 50% of our happiness is determined by genetics, 40% by internal factors, and only 10% by external factors. These external factors include such things as whether we're single or married, rich or poor, and similar social influences. The influence of external factors is probably way less than you thought. The bottom line is this: your attitude towards life influences your happiness, not what happens to